I'm excited to be joined by Adam Spencer. He covers all 16 SEC football teams for Saturday Down South. Be sure to check out his work there. Adam, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm excited, man. I'm rolling solo today. My co-host is actually on vacation, but I've got you here to break down the SEC. And, man, I've got a lot to get to, so it's going to be a lot of fun to kind of bounce around and talk about a lot of these programs here. But I want to start with some news. And, of course, the big story that's really been all over the place is what Greg McElroy said at SEC Media Days. He said, quote, a very much in-the-know person that I have a lot of respect for and I've spent a lot of time around, just really, really admire. They seem to think Nick Saban's not done coaching. I know a lot of us have been hearing this. It's been all over the place. I just want to get your thoughts on the possibility first of Nick Saban potentially returning to coaching. And if he were to return, where do you think some possible landing spots for him? Because, I mean, we know there's going to be plenty of programs that are going to be interested if he does decide to come back.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to come back. I mean, I think he's happy with his College Game Day gig that he has right now. And I mean, that's a pretty sweet gig. That's, pretty much like, I think he had a lot of fun behind the microphone this past year. I really do. He's said as much. I mean, everybody that worked with him said that he was loving it. So I think that he really, really enjoyed his time not coaching. I tend to agree with what Urban Meyer said. I don't know if it was today on the Colin Cowherd show or yesterday, but he said he doesn't think he'll see Nick Saban coach in the college ranks again. And I agree with that. But, if there is a reason for him to come back, maybe it's to, try to right the wrongs of his time at Miami in the NFL. So I think maybe the NFL, but even that, like, I don't personally see him coming back, but if I had to bet, like, it would be in the NFL ranks. And once you get into that, like, the most interesting possibility would be the Cincinnati Bengals if you want to win right away and have a team that has some talent to it. So, that's something to keep an eye on, I guess. I don't have any inside sources or anything, but if he was going to come back, he'd probably go the NFL route, I would guess. And if he was going the NFL route, I'd put, a couple bucks on the Cincinnati Bengals being the team.
Yeah, because I'm with you. I can't really imagine a route for college football. He's already climbed that mountain. Obviously, you can make a strong case that he's the best college football coach of all time. There's not really anything left to prove there. And on top of that, I really don't know what program would be the right fit. So
I would say that the right fit would be West Virginia, but they just hired Rich Rodriguez. So if, I don't see them firing him after a year. If there was a college program that could sway him, I think it would be West Virginia, but I just don't think that they're going to be open.
Yeah, I read some articles about that, and that would be an interesting one. My big question is, and I don't know this, and maybe you do they have the NIL war chest to compete at the highest level? Because I think that was kind of seems to be one of the issues at Alabama. Right before he left, there was a lot of rumblings where he started talking about NIL, and this was right at the time when Texas was getting ready to move into the SEC, and I think he kind of saw around the corner knowing that, like, look, we might not have the funds to really compete with the top tier programs now that the NIL had kind of changed the game. Do you think that would be a possibility? I mean, with West Virginia?
I think it would be enough, like, just getting Nick Saban there, I think would be enough to have them compete in the Big 12 right away. Now that Oklahoma and Texas are in the SEC, like, I don't know, who are you really competing against in the NIL space? I guess, like, Texas Tech has a pretty big, war chest, as you mentioned. Like, they have a big booster and an NIL collective, but outside of that, like, the Kansas programs aren't really going to be on that level. Oklahoma State has some deep pockets, but like, it hasn't really translated to consistent competing. TCU, Baylor, they're smaller schools. I think that just getting Nick Saban to West Virginia would open up the pocketbooks of, some big West Virginia boosters there. So I think that if he went there, they could compete. Like I said, I just don't see them really moving on from Rich Rod after one season. So I think that that's out, but I think that would be the one program to keep an eye on if he does get that itch.
Yeah, definitely fascinating. I think things would really have to go off the rails for them to pivot off of Rich Rod that quickly, like you said. And I do think the NFL makes a lot of sense. I never, if he ends up in the NFL, I never thought there'd ever be a world where Bill Belichick would be a college coach and Nick Saban would be an NFL coach. That would be bizarro land. But I want to shift here to some other news here because SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey recently said that the 12-team playoff format could stick around. And with the SEC and the Big Ten, we know they really hold the most sway when it comes to this. Is it fair to say that the SEC is under some real pressure to perform if it wants to maintain control over the format moving forward?
Yes and no. I don't think that let's say that they don't get a team into the championship game again this year. Like, they're not going to fall behind like the ACC or the Big 12. Like, they're always going to be there 1A with the Big 10, and it's been, the SEC's at 1, the Big 10's at 1A. That's what everybody's seen recently. Maybe that flips if the Big 10 wins another title this year to the Big 10 being the top dog and the SEC being right behind. But those two leagues are always going to have the biggest sway just based on the brand names, based on the money that's coming in, based on the TV deals. So I don't see them falling too far behind. I don't think that the money's going to suddenly be there for, these middle tier Big 12 and ACC squads to make the jump. So as long as they stay like significantly above those two leagues, then I think that they'll continue to have some power. It's just about, can they really put their stamp on this season, the way that they have in baseball, the way that they have in college basketball. It's all about, can we do all three things at once? If you're Greg Sankey, now that you've reached the top at the basketball world and the Big Ten's in the men's world hasn't won a national title since 2000. Can you get football back to where it was? And it's only been a 2-year like decline. So I think that looking at the teams this year, I think that they'll be just fine in the playoff this year, and we'll kind of put this narrative to bed.
Yeah, I think that's certainly more than fair. Now, speaking of money, there's been a lot of talk about the SEC potentially adding a 9th conference game. Greg Sankey defended the current strength of schedule, rightfully so. And he also said they're still evaluating it. Now, The Athletic reported that ESPN would pay somewhere between $50 to $80 million more annually for a 9-game SEC schedule. Does that kind of money, do you think that makes this just inevitable?
I think, I would bet that they would go to a 9th game eventually. But like Eli Drinkwitz was talking about it at SEC Media Days today, and he was mentioning it doesn't matter 8 games, 9 games, it's all about getting games that matter to the fans. And if you don't have the fans on your side, then like, what are we even doing? And I thought that was true. If the SEC stays at 8 games, maybe the solution is to have the Big 10 go back to 8 games, and then can Fox and ESPN pay for a joint Big 10 SEC challenge every year? Who wouldn't want to watch that? Who wouldn't want to, you divide up the top games. If it's Georgia, Ohio State 1 year, maybe ESPN gets that game 1 year. And then the next year, if it's like Texas, Ohio State, it's on Fox. You divide up the top games, you divide up the elite programs. Everybody gets 8 games. I think that that's a viable solution. And then I think, if you wanted to have each league do 8 games plus the crossover game to get to 9 power conference games. Like, that's what I think we should be looking at, is not league games, but power conference games. Like, let's get a game against the ACC. Let's get a game against the Big 12. Let's see these bigger matchups. Like, all due respect to like the Alabama A&Ms and the Citadels and stuff like that, but nobody wants to see SEC teams play those schools. Play them in week 1 if you have to, as like a little bit of a preseason thing. Nobody wants to see those games in November. So do what the fans want. Like, if you're going to try to make money, just do what the fans want, and the sport will continue to grow.
Yeah, I love the idea of that, because you're right. I think it's more about quality games, not necessarily having to be conference games, because you're right. I mean, is it more important that Oregon plays Rutgers,
Right,
or that, Texas plays Mississippi State? Or would you rather see Tennessee play Ohio State and Oregon play Texas, or whatever? I'd much rather see those types of matchups in the non-conference. And I think with the new college football playoff, and with it expanding probably even further, it's not such a big deal to take an L, in a non-conference game to a big program. That doesn't derail your season like it did in years past. So you're still in the running for the playoff. You're still in the running for national championship. And I think as fans, we're getting a better inventory of games. So
I think we just need to make sure that if that happens, that the playoff committee follows suit. If you have a school like Indiana just bought out a series against Virginia of all schools, and like to try to make their schedule easier. It's like, well, Virginia is about as easy as it gets, and in power conference games. So like, what are we buying out here? You know, like what's the purpose of this? But they're gaming the current system. They just got in with a 10-2 record. I don't know if it was 11-1 or 10-2 or whatever it was, that didn't feature quality wins anywhere across the board. So they're banking on, if Virginia's too tough to play, then like we have a problem with the selection committee. And if Alabama's playing 10 power conference games and Indiana's playing 9 with a 3-game slate that it includes an FCS team and 2 nobodies in the group of 5, we should be rewarding Alabama for playing that tougher schedule. And if that happens, then I do think, once the coaches see that tough schedules are being rewarded over nobody's schedules, then like I think that they will start to schedule tougher games.
Yeah, not to get too off subject here, but it kind of makes me think back to last year's college football playoff when there was a lot of conversation about Alabama possibly being the last team in, and it was basically between them and SMU. And I was making the case that, like, who did SMU play? Who did they beat? They didn't beat anybody. Now, I know Alabama's record wasn't great, and they had some L's that weren't great, and I understood the side that people were making for Alabama not making it. But my whole point was, look at the schedule they played, look at their quality wins, like, and so there is something to be said about that.
Yeah, and I think if you moved one of Alabama's losses from like at Oklahoma or at Vanderbilt to like if they lost, let's say like the LSU game, that's a more quality loss. They don't, lose to a school that's struggling. So it's just, these hypotheticals, you could go either way. But like if Alabama's not getting in with a 9-3 record over a school like SMU or Indiana with better records but less quality opponents, then they're not going to be incentivized to play those games. And, I don't even know if an increase in TV money is going to negate that, because they need the playoff money to make it all sort of gel together too.
Yeah, that's a good point. Now let's jump into the conference here, because I want to start with Texas. This team is loaded. I mean, they are loaded with talent. I've taken a good look at this roster here. Obviously, Arch Manning taking over at quarterback, a lot of excitement around that. On paper, this looks like a championship roster to me. What's the kryptonite for this team? What could derail this team?
Not much. I mean, an injury to Arch Manning, because they don't have Arch Manning backing up Quinn Ewers this year. So, I think that the backup quarterback situation is a little less settled this year. I expect big things from Ryan Wingo in the receiving game. I think that he's ready to take a big step forward, but if he doesn't, then, the receiving core has some question marks in it. Gunnar Helm was a really big part of what they did last year at tight end, and I don't know if they have a guy to step into that role right away. They reshuffle the offensive line. I think that Gooseby is going to be a really, really good potential round 1 NFL draft pick, but he's got to show it. And if he struggles out of the gate with the shift to left tackle, that's a cause for concern. I think that the defense is loaded. I'm not too concerned about the defense. They have studs at all 3 levels. I think that no matter what happens, I think their defense is going to be really, really solid. If the offense struggles a little bit, even if they struggle a little bit, like I still think like even if things go horribly wrong, like 9-3 is the record if things go horribly wrong. So, I mean, we'll see. But yeah, I think you're right. I think that this is a championship caliber roster, and I think we'll see them in the playoff.
Yeah, I think so too. They have some tough games. Obviously, Ohio State on the road opening this season is going to be must watch, but there's a couple harder games on the schedule. But yeah, it's going to be hard to think that they're not going to be favored in most of these games and have a real shot to make a run at it. Like I said, I was looking at this roster just going, where's the weakness here? They just look loaded, like you said, all 3 levels, offensive weapons. I know it was a small sample size, but Arch looks like the real deal. They're going to be a tough out. They're going to be a fun team to watch. Now, that's for sure.
Do you think that he should be the Heisman favorite going into it? Because I think that that's a bit much, but I agree with you that I think that even with the limited sample size, I think he's going to be like top 5 SEC quarterback, but it's a loaded SEC quarterback class too.
It is, and we'll talk about some of these guys, but you're right. I think maybe just the combination of the fact that Texas should enter the season AP number 1, that I think that obviously comes with some lofty expectations, and then you attach Manning to it. I get it, but I think obviously there's a lot more quarterbacks out there that are more proven that probably deserve to be the favorite. Drew Aller at Penn State, Nussmeier at LSU. There's some guys off the top of my head that I think are probably more deserving for that, at least early recognition. But yeah, the hype's real. We've been hearing about this kid since he was in high school. We heard this was coming, and I think we're all just kind of at the edge of our seats waiting for it. So absolutely exciting things to see what they do here. Now, we talked about Nick Saban. Obviously, Kalen DeBoer takes over last year, season 1, Alabama. Didn't go as expected for them. We saw a little bit of a dip here, and this is a program with did I say, an unrealistic fan base, maybe, so to speak, after the unprecedented success that they had under Nick Saban. But this is still a talented team. And I look at this team, I think enough talent to at least make things interesting in the SEC this year. But there's also some question marks. Your thoughts on Alabama? What's kind of the floor? What's the ceiling for this team?
Yeah, I think that, like we just talked about with Texas, I think that the defense is going to be fine. Like, this is a loaded defense. I think Kane Womack, I think that this is his last year running the defense because I think he's going to get another head coaching opportunity. They're loaded all over the place on defense. If you look at any mock draft, like there's like 3 or 4 guys going in round 1 from the Alabama defense alone. It's going to come down to the offense. But, I think that when Kalen DeBoer and Ryan Grubb are together, it's kind of a 1 + 1 = 3 situation. Like, they're more than the sum of their parts. And I think that it was kind of weird that they kind of took that detour last year, because even back in 2023, Saban tried to hire Grubb away from Washington, and he stayed at Washington. And we saw that ended with a spot in the national championship game. So it was weird that he kind of left for the Seahawks last year and it didn't work out. And now he's back with DeBoer. And I think that they're going to get that offense sorted out. So I think that their ceiling is 11-1. I think that their floor is another 9-3 regular season, which I understand. Like, Alabama fans aren't going to be happy with another 9-3 season, but that's their floor. I think like they're that good of a team. I'm a Missouri graduate, and everybody talks about how easy the Tigers schedule is, and it is for a SEC schedule. But they still have that game against Alabama, and that's the one that like everybody expects them to lose, and I expect it too. Like, that's a really good team that they've put together, and I think that if Ty Simpson can just look at the quarterbacks that Saban won titles with, like it was 3 with McCarron, it was 1 with McElroy, it was 1 with Jake Coker. Those guys, if Ty Simpson can be those guys, like, I think that the defense is good enough to carry them to the playoff.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Ty Simpson, because is it fair to say that Milroe, is as talented as he is, it wasn't really an ideal fit for Kalen DeBoer in that offense? Is Ty Simpson a better fit for what he really wants to do offensively?
I think so. Yeah, I think that Milroe's inconsistencies as a passer, like, he was a dynamic playmaker. He could throw the ball like crazy when he was on his game, but like when DeBoer was at his best, like, Michael Penix wasn't running all over the place. The guy has like duct tape for ACLs at this point, so he wasn't running all over the place. He was a pocket passer who could move a little bit, and I think that that's the kind of prototype that DeBoer and Grubb want in a quarterback. And I think whether that's Austin Mack, whether that's Ty Simpson this year, I think that they have that, and I expect the quarterback to be more consistent. And you remember the Oklahoma game, like, Jalen Milroe was really going through it that game. it really hurt the team. And I think that if they just get a guy like Ty Simpson who just doesn't put the defense in bad situations, they'll be fine.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think, like you said, even if their floor is 9-3, to me, that's a team that's probably right on the brink of the college football playoff conversation again, which, like you said, maybe that's not up to expectations of what Alabama fans want to hear. But if they get in the playoff, and you never know at that point. Ohio State loses to Michigan when they were a heavy favorite. Everyone's down on them, and then they go on that run. So you never really know once you get in the tournament what can happen. So
they might have fired Ryan Day without that title.
I said it on this podcast when they lost that game. I said, short of a national title, I think he's gone. And then they did it. They went on that run. So yeah, pretty incredible stuff. Ownership to LSU. This is an interesting team. LSU brings back a lot of offensive firepower. I have concerns about the offensive line. And we talked just briefly about Garrett Nussmeier. This is a guy that's being viewed as a first-round pick, a high-level quarterback. I have questions, though, if they can protect this guy and really unlock the firepower that they have for this offense, because I think that's a real concern for them. What do you make of LSU this year?
Yeah, Will Campbell is a quarterback's best friend, and like, anybody who thinks that they're not going to miss him doesn't know football. So like, they're going to miss him. Garrett Nussmeier, though, the next step in his progression is covering up for some of that stuff. Like, even with Will Campbell, like, there were times when like you saw him try to extend plays in the pocket, and he'd like turn into a defender running at him. Like, he's got to have a better clock in his head. He's got to be better at working inside the pocket, stepping up. He's got to do better at escaping when the situation calls for it. Like there's ways that he can help mitigate that. I think that LSU, the talent's there. They're going to have guys who aren't terrible along the offensive line. And I think that as the season goes on, it's going to get better. But like they just get thrown right into a fire at Clemson in week 1. I think that, Parker is a potential number 1 overall pick. If the number 1 team in the NFL doesn't need a quarterback, he's a potential guy. And like to have that be the first edge rusher that you go up against is not easy. But I'm high on LSU overall. Like I really, really like the receiving core. I really like Nussmeier. I like Durham. I like having Weeks and Perkins working together defensively. Another year in the Blake Baker system. I think that they have all the pieces to make a playoff run. I really do. And I think that they'll do it. I think that if they don't even make it to Atlanta for the SEC championship game, I think that that's going to be disappointing.
Yeah, I think so too. I think they're one of those teams, if you were to say going into the year, maybe 5-6 teams that you look at just top to bottom roster, coaching and everything, you could circle and say, I think they have legit national championship aspirations. And I think they're a team that they put it together. It could be that type of a year for them. But like I said, I do think it's a concern when you lose not just Will Campbell, but you also lose 2 other guys to the NFL draft. That's a lot of really good offensive linemen that walked out the door. Now, we know this is a team that recruits well. They tend to have very good players, 4- and 5-star guys that are coming up. But to your point, it might take a little bit to gel. When you've got some really big early tests in the season, if they start off kind of rocky and they're all of a sudden out of the playoff picture before it starts, so to speak, that could get interesting in Baton Rouge.
And I think that week 1 game with, Brian Kelly not having won a week 1 game at LSU yet, I think that if they lose that game, like even if it's a completely justified loss on the road against a Clemson team that's really, really good and probably going to make the playoff again this year, even if they lose that game, it's not the end of the world, but like it might feel like, oh no, here we go again, to the people who've been around the program, to the fan base, to like, if they lose that game. And it's like, I just think that we're going to hear some comments about Brian Kelly and like, is he the right man for the job? All that sort of stuff. And I just think that if you don't have a really strong locker room, and I think that they do, but if that noise gets too loud, like that can really derail a season before it even gets started. And so I just think that week 1 game at Clemson is just so important for them, and it's going to be tough.
So I want to talk about Florida because this is another team that I think is kind of interesting. It feels like to me they have a lot of upside in 2025, especially with the return of quarterback DJ Lagway. We know he's a really talented young guy. How much noise can this team make? Is it realistic to think that this could be kind of a breakout year for Napier in this program?
It all depends on Lagway's health. They were like 6-0 or 7-0 in games that he started and finished last year, but like that's not enough. Like he's got to start and finish more games, Like that's what it comes down to. I was really impressed by him at SEC Media Days. He addressed the injury concerns with humor and head on. So, I expect him to start the year well, but it's just, can he deal with the dings and nicks that come throughout a college football season? Like it's a long year, you're going to take big hits. I think that his offensive line is really good. One of the better units in the country. Jake Slaughter's a future 1st-round pick, I would say. It's just going to be about, can they keep him upright? Because and the receivers too. Like Trey Wilson was in and out of the lineup last year, and when he was in, he was really, really good. It's just about having all those guys healthy and able to play behind the offensive line, because that offensive line's great. The defense, I think, is going to be really solid. I think that they have some studs in the running back ranks. I think that the freshman Dallas Wilson, I think he's going to be a guy to keep an eye on this year for sure. About can Lagway start and finish more games, because they're really good when he does that, and he's just got to, like, availability is the best ability at the end of the day.
I want to talk about Georgia. We know this has been the program, the top of the mountains the last few years in this conference, and they're loaded again. This is another roster. We just talked about how if you were to kind of look at some of these top to bottom rosters, I said there's maybe 5-6 teams look at the beginning of the year and say, okay, this could be a national championship team. I think Georgia definitely fits on that list. But I have questions about their offensive line as well. And I have some questions about Gunnar Stockton at quarterback. Am I wrong?
No, I was surprised that they didn't hit the portal for somebody. I think that even if you believe in Gunnar Stockton, which they clearly do, I mean, it never hurts to have depth. It never hurts to have competition. Like, I was surprised that they didn't at least kick the tires. Maybe they did, but it just didn't get out. Like, I don't know. But I was just surprised at the lack of portal activity that they had at the quarterback position. Yeah, I think that the offensive line's the big thing. I think that Stockton, we talked about Nussmeier earlier, needing to improve his ability to mitigate some of those offensive line losses. I mean, I think Stockton has those tools. Like, he's a better runner than Nussmeier is. I think that the Georgia receiving core, maybe they'll actually catch some passes this year. Who knows? I mean, they didn't catch many last year, but they revamped that unit, and I think they did a good job with it. The defense, I think they're going to miss some of these guys that went to the NFL. There's only, like, I know that we say this, like they said it, people were saying it after the 2021 season when Jordan Davis and company got drafted, that like, oh, well, there's no way that the Bulldogs can be that good on defense again this year. And then Jalen Carter comes along and the defense is even better the next year in their second championship run. So, you never want to doubt a Kirby Smart defense. I have questions about this team, but it also seems like when you doubt the Georgia Bulldogs, like, they weren't preseason number one either of the years that they won the title. Then they were preseason number one a couple times and they didn't win the title. So I think that Kirby Smart loves being the underdog here. And I think that we saw it last year. Like, even in a down year, they won the SEC championship game over Texas and beat the Longhorns twice. So they get the Longhorns again this year in Georgia this time. I don't think it's out of the question to expect them to make it back to Atlanta, and we know how much they dominate in Atlanta.
Yeah, that was another one of those games when we were talking about the Texas schedule. Obviously, Ohio State early, but that Georgia game certainly one where you could see Texas stumble, because that's going to be a really, really tough matchup for them on the road, especially. Or it feels like to me, Adam, maybe half of the SEC coaches could legitimately be considered on the hot seat going into this year. Brent Venables entering his fourth year at Oklahoma. I think there's some pressure there. We kind of mentioned Billy Napier. He's heading into year 4 at Florida, and I think there's some real expectations for them to kind of make a jump this year. Kalen DeBoer, I think it's way too expensive, I think, to fire him at Alabama after just 2 seasons, but I do think there's some pressure on him. I don't know if necessarily a hot seat, but I think there is some pressure after that disappointing year 1. Jeff Lebby at Mississippi State is also heading into just his second season, but he has a huge rebuilding job on his hands. Sam Pittman at Arkansas, Hugh Freeze at Auburn, Brian Kelly year 4 at LSU. We just talked about them. I think there's some big expectations for them this year. Maybe not as much with Mark Stoops at Kentucky, but I think you could maybe throw him into this conversation as well. Let's talk about it. What do you think about this list here? Out of these guys I mentioned, how many of these do you think are legit hot seat guys, and how many guys do you think survived this season?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're going to see some hot seat activity in the SEC this year just because everybody came back this year. That's not going to happen again. Somebody's going to go. I would put Jeff Lebby on the coldest seat in that because he's heading into year 2, but we've also seen Mississippi State move on from a coach after 2 years here in recent history. So it wouldn't be the most shocking thing in the world. Like, Stoops, I think if he has another year like he did, and like, I would put him on a very hot seat. Like, I think that Kentucky could find the money to buy him out and say thank you for everything, but it's just not working anymore. I don't think Zach Calzada is a SEC caliber quarterback. I think that he's been coasting off of the win against Alabama for a few years now. Brian Kelly, I would say, is not on a super hot seat. I think that there would be a lot of fan base disappointment if he doesn't at least make the playoff this year, but I just don't see that happening. I think he's going to make it. Hugh Freeze is on a very hot seat, I would say. Like, I think we're seeing it with like this chatter about his golf game is just never good. Like, when that's the narrative around you and it coincides with a utter collapse of your recruiting class, like, that's never good. And he makes these comments sometimes that like throw everybody else but him under the bus. And if Jackson Arnold doesn't work out, it's like, okay, I thought you were supposed to be the quarterback guy. So, I think he's on a hot seat. I think Sam Pittman, that schedule's brutal for Arkansas. Like, they get Notre Dame in non-conference. They have to go to Memphis, which is a sneaky tough game. And I think they also have to go to Ole Miss. And I think that that's all before the end of September. So like, that's a brutal schedule there. I personally think that this is it for Sam Pittman. It's just, that's tough because it's like, what's he supposed to do with that schedule? Like, who can take Arkansas to the level that it needs to be taken to compete with a schedule like that. I don't know who that person is. So I think he's gone after this year. Venables probably stays. They put a lot of investment into that offense, and the defense we know is going to be good. I think that Napier I think we'll know by mid-October if he's going to stay or go, because they just need to get off to a hot start. And if they don't, then that's probably it for him at Florida. So yeah, I think that we're going to see some changes this year. I don't think half the league is going to turn over. I don't think you do either, but
No.
I expect 2 or 3 positions to come open probably.
I think Brent Venables is definitely interesting though, because this is a blue blood program, and I think they came into the SEC with bigger expectations, knowing that it's a big jump from the Big 12, but I don't think they expected it to be this rocky. So another disappointing year for them. I think it could heat up for him.
Yeah, I just like the investments that they made on offense. Like I like the Mateer, Arbuckle, Washington State additions. I think that that's so important to not only bring in a quarterback, but you bring in his offensive coordinator too. So now you have 2 guys that can teach the system. Jaden Knott's awesome. Nick Anderson's already been hurt in a car accident at LSU. And I just think that everybody who was involved in that Oklahoma receiving room last year just needs a priest at this point. I think that they need to exercise that room. I think that everybody needs blessed. They need to figure out what happened in that room last year, because everybody got hurt. If you set foot in that room, I would bet that some reporters went down with injuries too last year. It was insane. So I don't think that they're going to have that level of injury history again this year. So I like some of those pieces. Deion Burks is a really good piece. I think that the offensive line can't be worse than it was last year. The defense is going to be fine. Venables is taking over play calling again, which I think is a sneaky important thing. So they'll be fine. I like the investments that they made, but yeah, you're right. If those investments lead to another 7-5 season, or 6-6, or 5-7, yeah, he's probably gone. I just think they invested enough in the right places that they'll get to 8-4 or 9-3.
Now, everyone's talking about Georgia and Texas. They seem to be kind of the consensus favorites. I know LSU is getting a lot of buzz too, but which under the radar SEC teams do you think have a real shot to crash the playoff party in 2025?
I'm still high on Ole Miss. I think that the ceiling for Austin Simmons is a top 10 Heisman finish. I don't think he'll get to New York this year in his first year as a starter, but that kid has a good head on his shoulders. We saw him come in when Jackson Dart got dinged up against Georgia last year and keep the ship rolling. He did a really good job in his limited action. He didn't make mistakes. He's got all the arm talent in the world. He's been in the system for 2 years now, so this is his 3rd year, I believe. I just think that him and Lane Kiffin are going to be on the same page. Caden Lee is a really, really good receiver. They bring in a couple of additional transfers that I think are going to have. The offensive line is going to be steady, I think. The running game, I think, is a little bit of a concern, because Lane Kiffin loves to run the ball. They still run it more than they pass it. The quarterback puts up so many numbers under him because they just run such a high volume of plays. But Ole Miss, I think, Perkins on the defense there, he's going to be a sack machine. They have some talent at some key spots, and I think that they're a team that's not getting enough buzz as a potential sneaking into Atlanta or getting into that playoff, because they lost to Kentucky last year. If you just take that Kentucky loss away, they're in the playoff. They're just in, and that's if he can just cut out the stupid loss that Ole Miss seems to have every year, then I think that they're good enough to go 10-2.
Yeah, they were certainly right there last year. And to your point about Lane Kiffin and the offense, it seems like it doesn't matter what quarterback's under center for him. They're putting up big video game type numbers. I mean, people can say whatever they want about how prepared they are for the NFL. That system works for him in college. There's no doubt about it. And I expect another big offensive output from them. And like you said, that's certainly a good answer, because I think that is a team that was right there, and I think they have enough talent to make another run at it. So let's flip it to the other side here. Which SEC programs do you think are getting maybe a little too much preseason hype and could underachieve this year?
Well, we've already talked about Georgia, and I don't like to bet against a Kirby Smart team. I think that Auburn is another school that's just getting, they do have the talent, but Hugh Freeze has had talent before. The defense was really, really good last year. He's supposed to be the offensive guy. and he did not put it together, and he threw his quarterback under the bus. It's like, you're the one that signed off on bringing him in. You're the one that wanted to bring him in. So like that falls on your shoulders at the end of the day. I've seen Auburn in the top half of some power rankings. I don't know where they're going to finish at SEC Media Days in the poll. If it's in that 8-9 range, I think that that's too high. I think that they're a 10th and 12th team in the SEC. And I think that Kim Coleman's a beast. Like, that's not taking anything away from him. I like Eric Singleton Jr. I think Jackson Arnold's going to be better than he was at Oklahoma, but just simply by having receivers that are able to walk. So, I think that he'll be a better quarterback than he was last year, but is he a guy who can get you to 9-3? Like, I don't know. Like, we'll see, but I think that they're getting a little too much buzz.
So I think what you're really telling me is the next coach at Auburn is going to be Nick Saban.
That would be the chaos scenario. Yeah, I think everybody would. There might be wars fought in the state of Alabama if that happens.
I was going to say, I think every Crimson Tide fan just threw up all at one time. This has been absolutely awesome, man. Really appreciate your time. Once again, guys, to be joined by Adam Spencer, covers all 16 SEC football teams for SaturdayDownSouth.com. Be sure to check it out. They've got lots of great stuff on SEC football. Thanks again, Adam, for coming on the show, man. This has been a blast.
Yeah, absolutely. Always love to talk SEC with you.